A sci-fi alien women's story. She took off her jacket slowly, and my heart couldn't take it. Grace stood at the rail of the night deck and watched the black sea of stars breathe around the ship. Her breath small and white in the chill, the lights on the hull ran like slow fireflies along the ribs. There was a soft hum under her feet that sounded like a distant river. She felt the ship like a living thing, and she tried to be calm. She tried to hold steady. But the signal kept playing in her mind like a quiet bell. It had been a simple patrol in the silent lanes near the old rim. A route with little glory, a route with dust and drift and long hours. The crew was small. The weight of duty was large. Grace liked the quiet because the quiet gave her room to think. But then the signal came. It was a pattern of pulses and gaps. A voice written in light, and it felt like someone calling her by name, even though it spoke in no language. She knew she brought the signal to the others in the wardroom. The table glowed with a dim map. Nora leaned in with a steady brow. Megan sat with a rag in her hands from the engine bay. Claire tapped her nails on a mug from the galley. Ivy watched with the soft stillness of a storm you could not see yet. Every one of them saw the pattern. Every one of them felt the pull. It looked like a simple thread. But it pulled at the deepest place in each of them. Humans were not the oldest ones out here. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but they were the ones who could look at the dark and say, "We will make a door." They were the ones who could be afraid and still walk. The elder ships of the old empires had passed like comets. The long queens of the deep void had sung their songs and moved on. But humans kept lighting small lamps. They kept learning. They kept trying. And the stars started to answer with a kind of careful respect. So the crew turned their small ship toward the sound. They slid past dead moons and rust belts. The window showed a thin, cold line where light met shadow. The signal got clearer. It took on a kind of breath, a kind of pain. And it was there that they saw her, a figure adrift in a cloud of broken glass that used to be a ship. A woman with midnight skin and silver hair that flowed like smoke even in the near vacuum. A woman with eyes that caught starlight and held it as if the light was a promise she had been waiting on for a long. Timonora said they should hold position and run full scans. Megan said the engine would hate a full stop this close to the drift. Claire said she could ping the med pod to warm up. Ivy said nothing and already had the rescue line coiled like a snake ready to leap. Grace just felt the signal turn into a kind of soft ache in her chest. She knew they would bring the stranger in. She knew it like a tide that does not ask their lock, took her like a fragile lantern. They moved slow, they moved gentle. They did not know her lungs or her blood. They did not know her bones or the hum of her cells. They only knew she was alive. They knew she was afraid. The medpod had a cradle that could change shape and pressure. Megan set it to float just above the floor so the stranger would feel neither ground nor fall. And the woman opened her eyes and spoke. But no one knew the words. They only knew the tone. Low and level like rain at night, translator took time. It read the music in her breath. It mapped the rise and fall of her voice to the kind of math that lives in all hearts. The first words they heard were simple. "I am Lyra. I came for a door, and now the door is closed." And she looked at Grace, as if Grace were the hinge of that Dorth crew, asked for her story with careful hands and slow voices. They did not push. They did not pry. They waited and offered food and water and soft cloth. Lyra held a cup as if it were a tiny sun. She drank like someone who had been away from rivers. And then she spoke again. She said her people were of the wave and the wind. They moved in long arcs across the dark. They were not a war nation. But the war nations knew their paths, and one of those nations had found them near a blue haze world, had cut their ship with a blade of quiet light, had left Lyra to drift and watch the last small lamps of her sisters go out of pressed a hand to her mouth. Claire looked away and then looked back. Nora set her jaw and made notes. Megan ran a thumb along a scar on her wrist from a turbine that had taught her patience. Grace felt that soft ache grow and grow until it was a full heat. She felt the shape of human faith rise in her like a sun. The kind that says, "We will not let you stand alone." Aether was more to Lyra than a survivor. There was a way she watched the room, a way she weighed each face, and when Grace met her eyes, There was a current there, a current like gravity. Not forceful, not rough, but steady and deep. It made Grace feel seen in a way she had not felt in years. Not since the storm season on her lake home when a stranger had pulled her from a rip and then vanished into the rain. Lyra seemed to see the same rip in Grace and seemed to reach for her with just her gaze. Lyra asked for the map of the lane. She traced a soft line with a finger above the glass. She did not touch. She hovered like a careful moth over a candle. She spoke of a place where a door could open. A fold between lanes where ships slip and stars distort. And she said the war nation would come there to hunt because that is where prey must pass. She wanted to set a trap not of guns, but of grace. She wanted to make a light so bright and right that the hunters would doubt themselves and turn away. She asked for help. She asked for a human plan. Because she had heard the stories, even in the wave and wind worlds, of the way humans made art out of survival and turned fear into a tool. Nara said they had little to work with. Megan said the engine could give more than it should. Claire said the galley could be a lab because heat is heat, and you can cook a lot with heat. Ivy said the rescue lines could become veils to shape plasma. Grace said they had something even better. They had the will to stand between harm and a stranger. And Lyra looked at her and gave a small nod that felt like a warm hand through cold Glovisthi, began to build a false star. They used the core reactor and the spare coils. They spun a net of filament that glittered in the hold like frost. They braided it with the rescue lines and the mesh from the cargo cradle. Claire melted down old plates and poured them thin to act as mirrors. Megan tuned the engine to breathe in a syncopated rhythm so the light would pulse like a living thing. Ivy moved like a dancer between ladders and hatches without sound. Nora kept time and purpose, and the math that made the net sing. Lyra stood with them. She offered a technique from her people, a way to hold a frequency in the bones. She hummed with a throat tone that made the entire ship feel like a bell. Grace matched it with her chest and found her own voice become a part of the work. The two voices met and made a third, a beat that lined up the coils with the mirrors. And the net took shape. It became not a thing, but a presence. Like a dawn that had chosen to arrive early. When it was done, they drifted toward the fold. The star they had built slept in the belly of the ship. The lanes were empty except for them, and the quiet felt like the breath before a name is spoken. Grace watched Lyra stand at the viewport. She wore a jacket that Megan had found in storage. It was too big. It hung like a cloud on her and made her look small. But then she took it off slowly when the heat rose and every heart on the deck felt something catch. Not desire alone, but a deep shock of life. A reminder that each of them was still able to feel awe. That they had not gone numb in the endless night. Hunters came with no lights. They came like long knives across a table. They sent a soft ping that was almost polite. And then they cut their engines and let inertia carry them close. Nora counted 3. Ivy whispered 4. Claire said 5, and then stopped counting when the 6th shadow slid out of the fold. Megan patted the console like it was a horse about to jump a wide ditch. Grace looked at Lyra. Lyra looked back. And the nod passed between them again, the same small nod. The same warm hand and cold Glovisethi false star woke with a breath. It bloomed inside the ship and then poured through the mirrors and the net and out into the dark. It made the hunters glow with the light of their own paint. It made their shadows shear away. It made the fold look like a lake at noon. The hunters flinched. The lead ship tilted a degree like a head cocked in doubt. And in that breath of doubt, Grace sent a message in the simple human way. Not with a threat, but with a story as told the story of a small blue world that once hung 1,000,000 little lamps along its coasts. She told the story of fires on beaches and songs around those fires. She told the story of a storm that had tried to take a town, but the town had stood with ropes and boards and hands in hands. She said the lamps held. She said the people held. She said the shore held. And the hunters listened, because the false star turned her words into a field that made their hulls sing. They felt the story in their bones and did not know why it hurt and why it healed at the same time. Humans sometimes win because they fight, but more often they win because they change the room. They change the math by changing the heart. The lead hunter ship tilted another small degree. Then another, and then it turned. It turned not in fear, but in respect. It turned because it felt the cost of the hunt rise and the worth of the prey grow beyond price. It chose not to pay that price. And one by one, the others turned too, some slow, some quick. Like birds remembering a migration path, Lyra sagged with a breath that shook. Ivy caught her by the elbow. Megan laughed like a